a time and a place for an all-inclusive, turn your brain off, just relax. Like we all need that kind of vacation, but that's a specific intention that you go into that trip with. But I also think that there's a time and space for deep personal growth and introspection, and especially when you're feeling a bit stuck in your life or in a creative rut, I think travel can really open up those parts of your brain that are essentially turned off when we're in our daily autopilot routine at home.
Welcome to Connecting the Dots. I'm your host, Jessica Carice, and this space is a place where you talk about seemingly random topics, but in all actuality, they're connected together. And today we have a very, very special guest. Her name is Kelly Tolliday. She is a wellness travel expert, a retreat facilitator, and a travel advisor, as well as a podcast host of Transform with Travel. So, Kelly, thank you so much for being on the show. I'm so excited to learn about your life journey and everything you went through to basically get to where you are today.
Thank
So,
you.
yeah. So paint the picture of what your day looks like now. So you do the retreat facilitator, travel expert, and you have your podcast. So yeah, to paint a picture. Let's see what your day is like.
Yeah, so I mean, it seems like I have all my hands in a lot of different pots, I guess you could say, but certain aspects of the business are seasonal and there's different pushes at different times, different campaigns at different times. So it for me, I've always loved novelty and I've loved new projects and I love like the startup phase of businesses and projects. And I've way before I even got into the travel industry, I worked in marketing and digital marketing for agencies where I was working with like 11 different 11 different clients at a time. So I love, constantly kind of switching what I'm doing. And so that's kind of what it's like with the retreat business. The co-founder of R&R, I have a beautiful business partner, Chloe Ravel, and we run retreats and tours around the world with a wellness focus. But again, we might have 2 a year, we might have 3 a year, which means that there's different marketing pushes or different sales pushes, or you're on the retreat. So there's different aspects of the business that kind of flow. Some months are a little lighter than others. Some months are a little heavier. And then I'm also a travel advisor. So I take a handful of clients each month and help them intentionally design their trips, help support them make decisions on what to do, where to go, why, really uncovering their intentions behind their trips. And then, of course, I have the podcast as well, which is more of like that day to day, weekly, hosting a podcast yourself, that really having a daily touch point in how you're nurturing that side of the business too. And the podcast is all about sharing stories of daily adventurers, sharing their stories of transformation or growth, or just plot twists that their lives happens because of travel, as well as industry experts that come on board to talk about how they can enhance their travels or optimize their travels based on whatever area of expertise that they have. So my day flows tremendously with, every day is completely different. And that's something that I really love. I crave novelty, which is why I love travel so much. And I crave just being able to be in that kind of startup phase all the time.
Yeah, that is a lot. Like, I can
Yeah.
imagine you have your hands full. So with the retreats, what's the theme like? Like, I guess, what is it? What's the experience like? Like, what's the end goal? Like that, what's that one thing where you're like, okay, yes, this was a great retreat.
Yeah. So, I mean, every retreat is different because every location is going to be different. It's going to offer different lessons, the land, the people, the culture, the group that goes on the retreat or the tour. And so typically we do have like an overarching theme for each retreat. For example, this year we went to Portugal and the theme was slow living. Like everyone that came on that retreat came with some sort of intention of wanting to learn how to slow down in their work, in their life, within their own thoughts, in their minds. And Portugal's a beautiful landscape to learn how to do that. So for us, there is always like an overarching theme, and each retreat is a little bit different unless we're going back to same locations. Like we're going back to Greece in sorry we went to Greece in 2023, we're going back to Greece in 2025, and the theme is going to be relatively the same because it's like reworking on some of those things that we work on. So although there's specific themes per retreat, or different, I guess, goals per retreat, overall, what we want our guests to walk away with is kind of a renewed sense of who they are or what they need to continue to be their most favorite version of themselves. So on retreat, we say there's your retreat self, where you get to do all the yummy things. You get to do the yoga, the meditation, the yummy food, the community, connecting with culture, adventure. Like you get to do all these things for yourself. So there's your retreat self and there's your home self. And neither one are better than the other, but it's just how do we marry those two together so that there's less like a jarring experience of integration back home. And that's something that we work on a lot is once the retreat ends, it doesn't mean the retreat's ended. We have 4 weeks of support post retreat to make sure everyone's kind of settling at home, sticking to their intentions and their action plans, as well as staying connected as a community. We still send each other funny Instagram memes from retreats like 3 years ago or 4 years ago. So that's something for us. Like the end goal would be like keeping that community feel with each other and keeping that sense of who you are on retreat and how do you integrate that back home.
Ah, that's really nice. That's really nice. Yeah, like because at least for me, especially with going through a journey of like, what gives me energy? I'm like, I
Mm,
like vacations, but it's like I can't have such a despairing gap between loving vacation and then just feeling like I'm grinding away on my day to day. So, like, that's amazing that that's what you
exactly.
do, because that is very hard to figure out how do I keep this relaxed feeling and sense of peace in my day to day.
Yeah. And I mean, and that's exactly what you just said. It's like, how do we make, instead of it being like, I need a retreat every year, which we recommend, of course, like having that carved out space for yourself. Like me and my husband go on our own version of a retreat together where it's not necessarily like an organized retreat with somebody else, but we go away every year for a week so that we can reconnect with each other. We have 2 young kids, and that's something that we do is we carve out that space together. So we do always recommend 1 or 2 spaces for yourself to reconnect with yourself away from your daily obligations. But the ultimate goal is that your life isn't something you have to run away from. Your daily life isn't something you have to escape in order to get that peace all the time. And that's something that we help with a lot.
hmm So, how did you even get into retreats? Like, I've been noticing it more and more lately, but you've been at this for a couple of years. So, what was that first step towards doing the retreats?
Yeah, it's funny you say that because there is a massive trend of retreats and group tours, and it's definitely something that's exploded post COVID. People are craving adventuring and exploring and also being in community and feeling safe as they travel. The world is, a crazy place, and there's a lot of things that are happening that make people a little afraid to travel. So, going with a group is how people feel a little bit safer to do so. I've been running retreats now for 7 years.
Wow.
I always knew I've had a massive love for travel, passion for travel. Some of the biggest things in my life have happened while traveling. And so for me, it's always been a thread within my life. And it's always been something that I've been passionate about inspiring others. I had a blog 11 years ago. I started my first blog, my first endeavor in the travel industry started 11 years ago. And at the same time in 2016, 2017, I started my yoga teacher training. I had been practicing yoga since I was 15.
Oh, wow.
I got more serious with it when I found a studio and a teacher that I loved when I was living in Sydney, Australia. I did my yoga teacher training. And on the day of my graduation, I was on our final retreat for our graduation. And the day that I got my certificate, I booked a deposit to host a retreat 2 months later,
Oh,
about an hour south of Sydney.
wow.
And by the grace of God, I filled it 15 people with 2 months to go. It was like, I learned so much. I would never run a retreat the way I ran my first retreat now that I know what I did. But I loved it. I loved marrying the two concepts of getting out of your comfort zone, stepping away from your daily obligations, and also at the same time having a thread of wellness, of personal development, of personal growth, of connecting with like minded individuals that you may not have ever even said hi to passing on the sidewalk back at home. I loved bringing all those things together, being really like also immersed in nature as well, because it's something that I think, especially post COVID, people are really craving. And so I saw the magic of that. I think I passed out in the car on the way home after my first retreat. And I woke up the next day and I was like, this is what I'm going to do. And so since then, since 2017, I've hosted 11 multi day retreats. We've hosted about 50 or so 50 or so half day or full day retreats here locally in South Florida. We've hosted in Australia, Costa Rica, the United States, Greece, Portugal, Thailand. and we're heading to Peru and back to Greece next year. So it's something that I'm really passionate about. I love bringing those two things together, and I love opening up the world for people who want to travel in a new way and want to travel in a way that feels good, like you don't need a vacation from your vacation, and who are really prepared to grow from their travel experiences. There are definitely a time and a place for an all-inclusive turn your brain off, just relax. Like we all need that kind of vacation, but that's a specific intention that you go into that trip with. But I also think that there's a time and space for deep personal growth and introspection, and especially when you're feeling a bit stuck in your life or in a creative rut, I think travel can really open up those parts of your brain that are essentially turned off when we're in our daily autopilot routine at home.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So you mentioned all of these different countries that you had your retreats in. Were they so when you're going about planning these retreats, do you are these like new countries you've never been to before, or have you been there before and you're licensed here?
Yeah, so for the most part, they're either places that we've been to before. And I say we because I have my business partner now. I started doing retreats 7 years ago. She started doing retreats about 4 years ago. And in 2021, we teamed up together to start doing this. So when I say we, there's not some imaginary person behind me, it's my business partner. But for the most part, we host retreats in places that we've either been to or that we've lived in. And so there's this really connected sense of where we're going, why we're going there. Like when we went to, I lived in Thailand for a year and then spent a couple more months back in 2018 as well. And it was like when I was planning that retreat, I knew exactly what street we would be on. Like I took them places that I loved. I took them places to restaurants that I'd been to 1,000 times. So there's this sense of bringing people to places that we know. One, for a sense of just comfort for us as retreat leaders. Going to Thailand, there are a billion different variables that can happen over there. It's very easy to get sick. There's very easy to, you know, just random things happen over there, you know? And it's just there's a little sense of safety that comes with knowing exactly where you're going. And I think people want to go with people who are experts in the country that you're going to. I've hosted 2 retreats in Costa Rica. I used to live there in 2013 as well. And again, it was like this sense of comfort. Like if somebody has a question, I know exactly how to answer that question. The only places that we have hosted retreats that we haven't lived in was we went to Portugal this past year, but I what's the word? Consulted. That's the word I'm looking for. It's Friday. My brain not working very well. My daughter always asks me, "Is your brain working properly?" I'm like, "No, it's not actually." We went to Portugal this year, but I consulted with several friends who had hosted a retreat at this exact venue that we went to, and so there was a sense of comfort and knowledge that came with doing that. And then we're going to Peru in April. And that's another country that neither Chloe or I have been to, but we're working with a very dear friend of ours who owns a local tour operation company down there. So it's like we always make sure that we have several local on the ground managers and assistants who can speak the language, who know the contacts, who know the hospitals, who can get all the things if we need it, as well as having our own personal experience of going there. In terms of where we growing and like where we're going and why, we always poll our community. Hey, like where are we going? Like where do you want to go? In 2023, we thought we were going to go to northern Spain because that's where me and Chloe wanted to go. And then we just threw out Greece as an option, and people were like, "Oh, you're going to Greece? Oh, okay. Now we're in.
Mm.
Now we're in." So it's like we always talk to our community and see where they want to go to as well, because it's 100% not about us. It's about where does the community feel the call, and that's exactly why we're going to Peru in April as well.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And so now I'm extra curious. How did you even think, hey, I want to start living in another country?
Oh yeah. So I have always had this insatiable curiosity about how other people live. And so when I was growing up, we did do a lot of travel, but mostly domestic. One of my dad's biggest clients growing up was Royal Caribbean, so we got to go on like a lot of sales cruises with him. But cruising is an amazing opportunity for people to dip their toes in the water and see
Yeah.
what maybe island or country they want to go back to. However, you're not getting an immersive experience in the
Yeah.
culture.
Yeah.
So I got to dip my toe in a couple times, a couple different countries. And then when I was 17, my family took us on a trip to Costa Rica. And almost immediately as I stepped off the plane, my feet landed onto the ground. I was like, this is where I'm supposed to be. Like I just felt it in my heart. And so a couple years later, I got the opportunity to study Spanish there for, I don't know, 3 or 4 months. And I lived with a host family. Like I lived with somebody who did not speak English. That was the point, was I was forced to learn. I lived in a little town, like it wasn't in this big tourist destination. And that to me was everything. It was like, I'm going to sit here with my host mom and have coffee and try to speak Spanish. And then I'm going to walk down the street and go to the bank. And then I'm going to go to school for a couple hours and I'm going to go to the gym. Like, I just love seeing how people live. And I always get super curious about that. And since then, it sparked an interest for me to a couple of years later, I went to Switzerland to study hospitality management, and I studied there for a little while. And then in I met some friends in Switzerland from the Switzerland program, and a really good friend of mine from that program was going to Ireland to go to a family wedding. And he asked me if I wanted to go with him and his family. And I said, sure. And on that first night in Dublin, I met my now husband, Sam. So he was traveling as well. That's why I say big things happened in my life because of travel. He's Australian. He was just traveling on his own with a couple friends. I was there for one or two nights in Dublin, and we met and we stayed in contact. And long story short, when I graduated college, then I decided to move to Australia to live with him. That was like almost 6 months later. I met him, and 6 months later, I moved to Australia to be with him, and I was there for 5 years. So for
Wow.
me, it's like I just love, even now when I travel, if I'm hiking and I pass by, little doorways or alleyways, like I love just peering into people's lives. I'm the first person on a family trip, like looking up how much would a house be to buy here? It's a long-term rental, like, because I just have this insatiable desire to understand how cultures run and communicate and engage with each other and what we can learn from that.
Wow, that is so amazing and bold and courageous and risky. Like, oh my goodness. Like, I remember growing up, or not growing up, like in, late teens, early 20s or whatever, all the dating advice was like, you don't move for a man, blah, 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 blah.
Exactly.
Like,
Oh, you should have heard my group chat. Oh my God. Like I really only asked like three of my good friends who had also traveled pretty extensively what they thought. And those three friends who are still my best friends to this day were the ones like, Kelly, first of all, we all know you're going to do it. So why are you asking people for their validation? And second of all, go. And then when I did ask people who were kind of on like mostly my guy friends that I would ask their opinion, they were like, "Are you serious? Like this is like I'm a guy. I'm telling you, like don't go. Like this is he's not serious. Like don't they were trying to protect me, but it was really my friends who had also been out in the world and had also seen the kindness and the love and what is on the other side of that fear. They had also walked that path, and that's something that's really important to me. Is when I'm about to go do something that's a little bit, like you said, the word risky, that's a little bit fearful, that's a little bit unconventional. I don't go ask someone that hasn't done it before. I seek people that have walked a similar path because those are the people that I want to be in their orbit to understand the mindset of what that took to get there. So, and maybe their experience might show me, I'm actually not prepared for that amount of work or that amount of risk. Or I might be like, cool, like I feel confident to do that because of what you said. And so that's like a big piece of advice I give people is a big life move, starting a business, moving for a partner, um, having kids, like dropping out of college to pursue something else, like any of those like huge twists that you can make in your life. Like talk to people who you admire in your circle, online, anything, mentors, coaches, because you want to be asking people who have walked the walk. Like one of my friends started her own boutique law firm. She wasn't going to go ask the 30-year tenured partner at a law firm what they thought because they've never done that before, and they've never taken that risk. So then she started talking to other lawyers who had done something completely different with their degree and with their profession and are successful, and that's what helped her have the courage. And I just love that story because it shows you like how creative that we can be with our life and how we don't have to be afraid of risk. We just have to maybe be a little creative about how we get advice.
Yeah. No, Kelly, no, that's a really important point because it's taking me almost all my life to realize I need to talk to the people who are in this world.
Hmm.
And so, how did you even come about that wisdom so many years ago?
You know, somebody asked me on a podcast recently, what would you say to your 18-year-old self? And I just started like smiling. So I was just like, I would say, like, you're a rock star. Like, you are like, what? Like, just, I really don't think there was like a specific thing that I had to overcome, or there was no turning point for me. The main thing is that I grew up in a family that trusted my choices. When I went to my dad, I knew my now husband, then random Australian man that I met in Dublin. I knew him for 2 days. And I went back to my dad when I landed back home from Ireland, landed in the States, called my parents and said, "I'm going back to Europe in 3 weeks to see him again." And they didn't say, "Are you effing crazy? What are you doing?" Blah, 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 blah. They said, "Okay, like, let's look at flights and let me Skype with this man and let me take a picture of his passport." But, like, they've never, ever turned to me and said, "That's crazy. What are you doing?" Like, they always want to talk about it, and they always want to see either side of the story and maybe talk through the risks and the uncertainty. But I grew up with an unwavering confidence in myself because of the way that my parents raised me. And that didn't mean that they let me do whatever the hell I wanted to do. They definitely like pushed back, or when I was a teenager, 100% had boundaries. But it's something that I take now that I'm a mother. And granted, my kids are 4 and 2, but it's something that I'm going to consistently remind myself about when they do have those really outlandish dreams of wanting to, whatever, be a rock star and travel around. Like, I want to remember that I don't want to squash that courage in them, because my parents never did that for me. And now I pretty much always have this like reservoir of strength within me.
Wow, that is amazing, Kelly. Like, and it's so interesting because for me, growing up, I had the exact opposite experience. Every choice that I wanted to do, even the type of clothes that I wanted to wear as a kid, got criticized. Like everything got
Mm.
criticized. And prior to me going on like my own internal transformation, spiritual journey, and all that, like meeting someone like you and how you come across, like I wouldn't talk to you because no, seriously, I wouldn't, because I'm like, I don't even know what to talk to this type of person about, because I was just so used to like being able to relate to people with insecurities and they don't have that internal sense of confidence, and like we're trying to figure it out together. So it's so fascinating how your parenting can affect your mindset and that internal sense of confidence, and then allows you to just be bold, make, calculated decisions, and be wise with who you're talking to for their advice, and basically whose advice you're getting put into your head. Like, that's amazing. Like your parents, the way how they raised you is a blessing. Like, that is amazing.
Yeah, and well, thanks, mom and dad. I know that they'll listen because they listen to everything. So, what I would say to you, like in that prior, before you started this journey of kind of like really getting into introspection, is it, yes, of course, the way that your parents raise you or criticize and make you doubt every decision that you're ever making. I have worked with a lot of clients and on retreat specifically about this. Like, this criticism of every choice you make results in basically analysis paralysis and indecision, or making a decision and then backtracking and feeling really shitty about it. Like, what I would say is, one, I always vouch for a third party professional, whether it's a therapist, whether it's a coach, whatever works for you. Number one, first and foremost. And I don't have that credential of being a therapist. So every advice that I give is purely just what I'm learning along the way. But you can also take back that narrative. Like, you can now, as an adult, with hindsight 2020, can now reparent yourself, almost as if you're rewriting that script in your mind and like stopping yourself as you get to that insecurity. And then also, maybe it's not necessarily travel that's getting you out of your comfort zone. Maybe getting out of your comfort zone is having a conversation with somebody that does make you feel like, oh, that girl like has so much confidence. Like that makes me feel a little uncomfortable. Like that would be stepping out of your comfort zone, like going and having a conversation with somebody like that. And
Yep.
so it's like, for me, travel is less about how many miles you've flown or how many countries you've ticked off. For me, travel is truly like, what level, like, are you growing and traveling from one level of yourself to the next? Like, whether that is country to country or whether that's literally like your self development and your self growth.
Yeah. Yeah. And your advice is like 100% spot on because that's literally what I did. I
Mm,
reparented myself,
mm-hmm.
telling myself, you're good enough, you can do this. You're good enough, you can do this. Like there was a phase of probably 3 to 4 months where I was constantly doing that, like every single day and like rewiring my brain, you know?
Yeah. And it takes time, and it
Mhm.
totally takes time. And it's just, I mean, there's just, because I have like this unwavering belief in like being able to take a risk and be really okay with failure. There's a ton of other stuff. Trust me, my therapist is busy with me. So, so it's like we all have our own stuff, and like the self compassion piece. Like just this morning, like, oh my God, I was like crying in the car because I had a really rough morning with my girls. And it's like everyone has their own things that they're working through. And things like travel and retreats really do help you kind of get out of that bogged down. Like, I got to cook dinner and then the dogs and then the kids and my work. Like, having a little bit of space really does give you a little bit more clarity. Like, there's parts of your brain that turn on when the stress levels aren't so high, and we don't have access to it when we're such in fight or flight. So the travel piece, whether that's a staycation or you're hopping over to, Europe, or you're taking a camping trip in a national park, like there is real science behind the benefits to your brain and the healing, the deeply rooted healing that can happen whether you're on an organized retreat or not. Like, you can have a solo trip and uncover so much about yourself. I always say, like, explore the world, discover yourself. Like, that's how we marry the two together.
Mhm. 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 Wow. So how did you even with traveling and wellness, how did you get into the mindset piece of it?
Mm. You mean, can you repeat the question? Sorry.
So the mindset piece. So like I've been hearing you say like your brain does this and nature is good for your mind and all this stuff. So like when did you start digging into, okay, I want to
Okay.
understand how traveling and nature really affects your brain?
Thank you. Okay. Thanks for repeating that. Like I said, Friday brain is different than Monday brain. So, first of all, there is a really big body of science right now around a concept called the 3 day effect. There's an author and a writer called Michael Easter, and he wrote The Comfort Crisis. It's an amazing book. Link it in the show notes. Oh my God. I've never highlighted a book as much as I highlighted this book. So, there is a concept called the 3 day effect, and there's researchers, I believe, out in like the UK and Denmark and other countries, where when you spend 3 days in a natural setting, I mean, the more immersed and less techy you can get, the better. But 3 days in nature, your biological markers for stress go down. So your heart rate, your breath rate, your blood pressure, everything starts going down. At the same time, cognitively, the areas of your brain for creativity, solution, or like being problem solving, creative problem solving, imagination, all of those parts of the brain start lighting up. So, why we really promote multi-day retreats is because literally you can see it happening physically to the naked eye. The stress markers, the inflammation, the nervous system, everything going down by like day 3 or 4. We see that on retreat. And that's why we try to make our retreats like 5 to 8 days, because it literally takes 3 days. And I'm sure you can relate to this. You go on like a weekend vacation, it's Sunday morning, you're finally starting to feel relaxed, and you have to pack up everything and go home. It takes our bodies, our nervous systems, our minds a very long time to shut off from this constant doing that is required for us to live in this world and make money and be able to eat and live and all the things. So there's valid reasons why we do the things that we do. So there's that shift, the 3 day effect. I always try to keep that in the back of my mind when I am traveling, or if you're camping, whatever it might be. The mindset shift of how traveling how I've started to really shift and view how traveling can truly change your life, or just exploring or stepping out of your comfort zone. As I said, it doesn't have to be big trips. It could be, I'm going to go across the state and go to a city or a town I've never been to before. Um, in 2018, me and my husband, or I guess he was my boyfriend then, we were supposed to live in Indonesia in a tiny island off of Lombok called Gili Air. We loved it there. We had been there in 2015. We wanted to go back. So we quit our jobs in Sydney. We moved to Gili Air. We were supposed to be there for 6 months. My husband was going to be doing his dive master program, and I had a job teaching yoga in this little open air shala in the middle of this tiny, tiny island, like pure bliss, like couldn't be more Instagrammable if you wanted it to be. And we had the drone and the GoPro and the all the things. So within a week, maybe a couple days of being there, I had gotten very, very sick. I was like very dehydrated. I needed to get to the mainland to go to the hospital. And the night that I was going to go the next day to the hospital by myself. And that night, a 7.0 earthquake hit the middle of the island. And this island is 20 minutes. Like you could walk from one end to the other. Tiny, tiny island. There's no cars. There's like just horses and carriages and bicycles. So a 7.0 earthquake hits. There's no cell service. We don't know if there's a tsunami coming. Like we have no idea what's happening. And we were essentially stuck on the island for 3 days before we got military evacuated. And because there's thousands of tourists trying to get off this island, there's no flights until we finally find a flight to get out. We went to Borneo. I went to the private hospital in Borneo to finally get myself like figured out what's going on with me. Got some fluids. It was all good. And then we just in Borneo trying to find like, well, what do we do next? Like we had 6 months planned to be in Indonesia and really no other plans after that. And so for me, I really went through a very deep journey of grief. I grieved the experience we didn't have. I was processing an insane amount of trauma in my body. My husband was processing in a completely different way that I deemed unhealthy, and that caused problems. And we just essentially decided, okay, let's go back to Thailand because that's our second home. We had lived there before. We landed there for a couple months just to kind of like decompress. And then we made plans after that. But for me, like, that experience now looking back was the start of me really trying to understand like how do we grow and how do we cultivate this traveler's mindset and apply it to everywhere in our life so that we can feel successful, or so that our life feels like vibrant and alive. And everything that we learn along the way as we travel, like I pray to God no one listening ever gets involved in a 7.0 earthquake. No one needs that. You don't need that big of a shakeup to change your life. But even that experience, now I can look back and like that exact experience sparked an entire catalyst in my life, personally, in my relationship, in my work. And I can apply what I've learned from that experience out into my world. And that wouldn't have happened if I was sitting in the safety and the comfort of my own home. Again, I hope no one, like a lot of people had died. Like I hope no one like has to experience something like that. But there are experiences when you do travel that aren't necessarily the most Instagrammable experiences. Like you get into some tricky situations sometimes, and it's up to you to kind of process it. Obviously, like don't toxic positivity your way out of that experience, but like how do we apply what we've learned and really use it for our personal like, development and growth toolkit? And that was when it really hit me that we can offer so much more than just a fun tour in Peru or a retreat where we're like kind of hunkered down in this one ashram or this one studio and we don't actually have a connection with the local community or culture. Like for me, the travel piece and everything in between is what makes it so special to be on a retreat or to go on an intentional trip or to work with a travel advisor who will really be able to take you from one step from the very beginning of the trip to the very end and know that it's going to be what you want, and then also being able to like integrate what you learned on your trip back home.
Wow. It's funny because like you mentioned, you didn't have any like traumas or anything to like, get over as far as like, mental and childhood type of thing. But it's interesting how the universe kind of shakes us up in our own unique way, one
Yeah.
way or another.
Oh,
You
I
literally
mean,
got
there
shook
was
up.
I mean, I hit a personal and professional rock bottom in 2017. And then the earthquake was almost exactly a year later. And I have always thought that, like, if that didn't happen, I literally would have just like carried on the way that I was going and I would have buried a lot of stuff. And it 100%, like, that was for me to personally to understand how to get to the next level of what I needed to do. And I was holding myself back a lot. And so, yeah, it for sure. And yeah, it's so funny when you're like, yeah, no, nothing really happened. And then boom, 7.0 earthquake. Um, but yeah, I mean, that was a really big experience for me. And it's definitely changed like the trajectory of how I run my business and everything.
Yeah. That experience is nuts.
Yeah,
Like,
it really was. Oh, I have a whole podcast episode. Episode 4, I believe, is like the entire start to finish everything that happened.
yeah, I'm
But
definitely gonna listen.
I will say, um, because of that, from a travel perspective, we didn't have anything to do for like 4 or 5 months. So we went to India for 5 weeks. We did Sri Lanka for 30 days. We did 3 weeks of Western Australia. So we got to see places that I never thought that we would, because we were going to be hunkered down in Indonesia for a while. And now Sri Lanka is our favorite country in the world. I would go back to Western Australia in a heartbeat. And so again, it was like tragic experience. Like many people had passed away. The island of Lombok was devastated. So I'm not trying to like silver line it. But for me personally, it showed me that like that quote where it's like, it's not a roadblock, it's just a detour. Like that was 100% a learning lesson for me, how to be okay with the detour, not hold on to the plan that didn't come to fruition.
One thing I noticed in my life is that whenever I have a plan with something, it never works. Things just don't work. Like
Yep.
much as we think we think we know what we're supposed to do in a particular moment, there's always some sign or something that's like, no, 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 no. You gotta go this way, this is really your purpose. So it's really, I'm really happy that you're able to have that moment where, I guess, a moment of clarity.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's almost like that hero's journey, like the classic hero's journey is there's some personal challenge, you go into the depths of the underworld, which is your own internal world, or perhaps the external world as well, and then you come out the other side to then share what you learned with the world and make it better in some way. And we have those yearly, monthly, sometimes daily, like lifetime, like there's like all these little mini heroes journeys that we're all going through. And so you had mentioned like the that you were appreciative that I mentioned, that reroute. And something that I say that travel really teaches you is how to pivot in your life and then accept that pivot. And so I personally think like your barometer of success, especially as an entrepreneur, as a mother, as a partner, like all of it is your ability to be able to pivot and realize when something's not working anymore and be okay to say, okay, like plot twist, change it up and move on. And so an example of that I have while traveling was we were at a hotel in Koh Phangan in Thailand with our two girls, and it was a beautiful hotel, but it was not set up for children whatsoever. There was like it took a golf cart to get like straight uphill, like you couldn't even walk it because you literally would like fall over. So it was
Wow.
not the most kid friendly hotel. We are supposed to be there for 5 nights, and me and my husband looked at each other like, this is not going to work. Like we've spent all this money on this hotel, so we didn't really want to cancel it. But I'm like, but are we going to be on edge for the next 5 days? Literally, like, are we going to be on edge for the next 5 days with our children? And we bit the bullet. Like we just ate it, booked another hotel on another side of the island, and we were so much happier. And it's like I could sit there and wallow in the money that we just lost over this hotel, or I could be really grateful that we had the ability to just say, okay, like this money doesn't matter right now. Our safety and our happiness and all this matters, and be able to move forward. And it's like, what are you going to focus on? What you lost or what you gained? And I think that's the ability to like pivot and then be okay with the benefit of that pivot rather than wallow in what you've lost in that pivot. That's what I think makes a successful like I said, a successful business owner, a successful entrepreneur, a successful mother, a successful person is the ability to take that pivot in stride.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You made me think about a trip that we went on last year. So last year for my birthday, I was turning 33. I'm like, I'm gonna do my dream trip, and so we went to Egypt and Italy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I went to Egypt and Italy, and so I think prior to like I'm the complete opposite of you, Kelly. Like I'm nuts. I didn't do any research. I'm like, you know what? Let's just book this hotel and we'll figure out. Like we didn't have anything planned, nothing. So we arrive in Egypt, we get to the hotel, and then we just saw like, I'm like, why are these people treating us like this? Like not these people, I don't want to say that. I'm like the hotel staff. The hotel staff is treating us kind of funny. And I'm like, this doesn't feel right. Like, where's the hospitality? Because
Mm,
I this was my birthday. Like, I spent a lot of money. This was a
yeah.
five-star hotel. I've
Yeah.
been in five-star hotels before. I'm like, what is this? So, me and my husband, we were like getting antsy, and I'm like, no, this is not it. Like, so we pivoted.
Mm,
We pivoted. We went to another hotel, and it was like night and day. We started having the best experience ever. Like, it was a wonderful trip. And I'm so happy that we listened to that inkling, like, oh, you should probably pivot. And we are able to book another hotel right away. It was like 5 minutes away. And then when we arrived there, there was the Kempinski in Egypt. So when
mm,
we arrived there, amazing, amazing, so friendly. Like I think by the time we left the hotel, like all the staff were our friends and everything like that. And it just turned into a wonderful experience and such lovely people, just from being able to pivot. And that, and then I'm also noticing it in my personal life as well, with just seeing like those resistances and those inklings. I'm like, okay, this is showing me that these, I guess, seeds aren't growing in the way that I thought that they would. So
mm. Yeah, and also like realizing that nothing is wasted. Like, like you said in your personal or businesses, like you might be planting seeds or trying to like grow something in the way that you think it should, and it doesn't grow up that way or plan out that way, or maybe it just doesn't even take hold at all. And yeah, just really, like I said, like be accepting how it just turns out. Like a lot of the Buddhist teaching is around not attaching yourself to any particular outcome. That doesn't mean not having any sort of ambition or drive or like hustle to like make some, to like do some good in the world or make something, but it's also being okay with like planting the intention but then letting it grow the way that it grows. The same way that you would plant a flower, you would never be like, well, that didn't turn out the right shade of pink. Like it is how it is. Like, it's a plant, it's a tree, it's a whatever. Like how can we also let our ideas and visions and ambitions come to life in the way that the universe is conspiring for it to do? And sometimes the universe conspires for you to get off that island in Indonesia and go do something completely else, and letting yourself kind of go through that grief process, but also not stay stuck in that grief process.
yeah. Yeah. And all of those are very, very important points that you've hit on. Allowing yourself to go through the grief process. That's also something recently, like I've been doing probably the past year, of just allowing myself to feel things.
Mm,
I think a lot of people, speaking for myself, try to present being strong. And so you equate being strong with not feeling things.
yeah.
You know, that's really important. And then also the other point you made about not being attached to a particular outcome. Yes.
Yeah. I think particularly as well when you look at it, like if you use travel as an example, because I basically use travel for an analogy for everything. The same thing with travel. Like you might be like, we're going to go on this, especially with kids, like we're going to go on this family vacation and we're going to connect and relax and hang by the pool. And I'm going to read my book and I'm going to, it's going to be amazing. And you get there and your 3-year-old has a tantrum the whole time and there's jet lag and you're not sleeping. And then you're pissed off because the trip didn't turn out the way that you want. Or you spend all this money to go to Greece and it rains the whole week. It's like it's the first time it's rained all year. And it's, of course, it's the time when I'm here. And why did this happen to me? And blah, 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 blah. It's like, okay, if we can just like unattach ourselves, detach ourselves from this particular outcome that we expected it to be, because that's basically what frustration is unmet expectations, right? Like, how else can we find beauty in the situation? Or is there another solution where we might be able to get a refund? Or can we just look at this experience with our children as a way for us to kind of overcome our normal reactions to them when they start having tantrums? Because we're not at home, so we have less responsibility. I can just sit there with her while she cries. Like, yeah, that's not ideal on vacation, but now I can actually practice these parenting techniques that I read about or listen to about, whatever it is for you. It's like, how else can we look at the situation rather than looking at it from this unmet expectation or this outcome that we so, hold tightly in our hands. And we teach
Yeah.
that a lot on retreat. There's a lot of times that we do
Mm-hmm.
everything we can in our power to make sure that things flow the way they're supposed to flow, but it's a different country, it's a different language. They're on a completely different timeline. Like, the Thailand
Yeah.
is a completely different world. So things are not going to happen the way that our itinerary says it's going to happen sometimes. And part of the
Mm-hmm.
teaching process for our clients and ourselves as leaders is talking about this. Like, okay, what was frustrating about this and why? What about our American pace of life finds it so frustrating that this happens in another country? What about the way that I was raised that is really like bristled by this person's interaction with me? And it's like, cool, we can actually take what we learn without being angry about it, and take what's happened to us and use it for our own personal growth.
Yeah, that is a very, very high level of awareness, a high
Yes.
sense of awareness. And I love that you actually take the time to address the frustrations where like a lot of other facilitators would be like, okay, moving along, and
Yeah.
just kind of brush it under the rug.
Yeah, and I think that's something that Chloe and I do very well, is that we're on this journey, we're on this trip with our people side by side. Yes, we have the clipboard, and yes, we have the itinerary, and yes, we have the contacts, but we're also side by side going through our own personal stuff. Like, we each have our own personal stuff going on, and we talk about it openly. Like, we cry, we laugh, we everything. So I think if anyone's listening that wants to get into running retreats, or because that, as I mentioned at the beginning of this, was it retreats are getting very popular now, and not just yoga teachers are running retreats. There's coaches, there's communities, there's businesses, like people, it's fitness instructors. Like, it is very popular now. And so one thing that I can say is, of course, like, have your shit together as a leader in terms of like the logistics and lean on support for that, but also, like, don't be afraid to like show your vulnerabilities. I know we had a retreat in the DR in Dominican Republic, and there was a zip line excursion. Most of the guests went on it, and my business partner Chloe was terrified, but there was maybe 14 of the other women that were doing it that were also terrified. So they got to see, like, oh, Chloe's a real person and she's scared. It's okay that I'm scared, and we're all going to do it together and cheer for each other and whoop and wall, like, just like really like amping each other up. Whereas in Costa Rica, one of our retreats, we did a sweat lodge, and I'm claustrophobic, and it's a very tight, contained, hot environment, and I was terrified, and there was 3 or 4 other women that were terrified too. Terrified might be an exaggerated word, but like very afraid of this. And we sat next to each other and held hands, and one of them decided to leave, and that was okay. And it was like they got to see that, like, these experiences are letting us grow as leaders too. And I think that's something that is important when you are a leader of any community, is like, of course, like, there are logistics and things that make people feel safe when they're with you, that if you have that together, that is part of your job. But also, it's okay to show vulnerabilities, and it's okay to show that the same thing that they might be afraid of or nervous about is something that's also making you feel a little nervous. But here are the strategies and the steps and the community to help you move through it.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. That's really amazing. And I love the vulnerability aspect. I noticed as I became more vulnerable with myself and admitting all of my different, shortcomings that, I had to work through, that's when I really started connecting with people.
Hmm.
And I was like, growing up, I was always so scared to really be vulnerable because I'm like, no, 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 people are going to think I'm weak. People are going to think this, blah, 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 blah. But no, it makes you relatable and it builds an even stronger sense of connection.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if like exactly what you share on social media, and that's a whole nother topic about how vulnerable people can be. But I find that when I'm the most real, like if I share something about struggling with something in motherhood, or when I was going through postpartum with my first, like I really struggled and I was pretty open about it online. And I've never had so many responses or messages or anything than when I'm sharing something and being open about it. So the same thing, it's a little bit easier to do it behind a screen, but the more that we can open up with each other. And that's why I think the community where we initially have met through the Daily Drip, I think that's why it's so valuable to so many women, is because we can be real about what it's like to be an entrepreneur or a business owner or just a woman. And the more that we can create spaces for this, for the different areas of our life, even just our friends or our family, the more we're able to show, like, yeah, we might be having like slightly different struggles, but we're walking shoulder to shoulder together. And we're like, Ram Dass, one of the great leaders in
Mhm.
the yoga world, always says, like, we're all just walking each other home. And if we can
Yeah.
remember that, like, it kind of builds this sense of community and bolstering support too.
Yeah. We're all just walking each other home.
Hmm.
Ah, that's an amazing quote. 'Cause that's, like,
Yeah, it's one of my
literally how I
favorites.
feel. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, like, with being on this journey, it's, like, literally how I feel, with almost everybody who I meet, and they're bring some type of message or some type of thing or some type of, like, even this week, I just talking to different people, going to different networking events, I'm hearing, like, the same type of message from different people. I'm like, "Okay, thank you. Alright, I
noted,
got
noted.
it." Yeah, so there is so much truth in that quote. Thank you so much for sharing that, Kelly.
Yeah,
And thank you so much for sharing your story and your passion with travel and how impactful and transformational it can be. And, thank you so much for painting the pictures of even just some of the tactics and skills that you need while traveling can really trickle over into your day to day personal lives. Like, that's amazing.
100%. Yeah, thank you. It was so much fun. I love what you're doing with this podcast and giving people the space to. I think the main thing is, like I said before, like, people don't know what's possible for them until they hear. It's kind of like the 4 minute mile. Like, no one knew that it was possible until it was possible, and now it's getting, broken left, right, and center. And so it's like, and until you know that there's other ways of living, you're taking your own personal experiences and shaping it into something that can be possible for you. And so I think that's exactly what this podcast that you're doing really shows people, is like, oh, wow, I did go through that hard thing, but maybe I can reshape it into something powerful that can help others, or even just help myself and my own community. And so I thank you for, I know what it's like to run a podcast. It's not, it's not for the faint of heart, but when you have a passion like you do, you can just feel it as you're speaking. It's really powerful, and it's important work. So thank you for doing this.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And so, for those who do want to start transforming their life with travel, what would be your top three pieces of advice for them to get started?
Mm. So I think the main thing it comes down to is being intentional. And we hear this word all the time. It's like, well, what does it really mean? And it comes back to, what's your why? And I said it before, like, if you want to if your intention, like, you are on the edge of burnout, you need to get out of your day to day life, you and your husband need to like reconnect, or your partner, whatever it looks like, your intention could be just that. I just need to relax and turn my brain off. And if that's it, an all inclusive might be a really great spot for you. A cruise might be a really great spot for you. You don't have to think about anything. You don't even need your wallet. Like, you just get to turn off and have fun, right? So that could be your intention. Another intention, like, just getting very clear about, what is it that I want out of this trip? That's what I think takes something from a vacation into a transformational exploration or adventure. For some people, it's, I am on tech all day and I can feel my brain starting to like malfunction basically from all the tech. I need to completely immerse myself. And I have amazing partners that I recommend to people for great national park trips, multi-day national park trips here in the US. That's how you can maybe choose your trip, is like getting very clear about what the intention is, what you need, asking yourself why a couple times. Why is this my intention? No, but we're like, really, but why? But why? And getting deeper and deeper into the why behind the trip. And that will help you determine where you go based on that. And so a lot of times we kind of get influenced by Instagram or by, the latest article on CNN, or you see another friend had an amazing trip to the Bahamas and you're like, well, I need to go to the Bahamas. But it's actually like maybe reverse engineering this and saying, okay, why do I need a break from my day to day life? What is it that's missing from daily life that I would like to cultivate on this trip or bring into my life on this trip? Is it possible that I don't even have to go overseas to find it? Or is completely stepping out of my comfort zone part of that intention? Taking that piece and then applying that almost like a filter when you're looking at hotels. Like, I want kid friendly, I want 4 bedrooms, I want air conditioning. Like, can we place the filter of our intention over the overarching itinerary of our trip? And then that just trickles down to where you go, what you're doing every day, who you're going with. Maybe it's that you want to reconnect with your partner. Then, yeah, of course, your husband or your wife or whoever, your business partner might come with you. Maybe it's that you have no idea who you are anymore after your kids left home and you're an empty nester and you need to go on a solo trip for a couple weeks to really like figure out who you are and what you want to do. Cool. That means you're not inviting anyone. And so this intention piece is just first and foremost. I know you asked for 3 things, but I think that we could just leave it at that, because I think that's where most people are not applying that first step, and it could change the trajectory of how your travels roll out from there.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. Intention before everything else. Yeah.
Exactly. And I ask that when I have travel advising clients. And the first thing that I say on the trip is, of course, like, is this for a big occasion? Is it a honeymoon? Is it an anniversary? Is it a birthday? Whatever. But then after that is, well, what's your intention? And oftentimes they're just like, why are you going on this trip? Apart from it being a honeymoon, like you're choosing Thailand for 2 weeks. Well, why? Like, why do we want to do that for your honeymoon? Like, what about the culture, the place, or like getting really down to the nitty gritty? Because it might turn out that maybe that might not be the right country for your intention, or maybe you want to have a less intense hopping around trip like you thought you might want, and you just really want a romantic getaway somewhere. So that's something that it's almost like coaching that my travel advising is almost like travel coaching, because I do help you get down to the nitty gritty. And I do give a lot of support in figuring out the exact trip that's going to support your overall goals, not just for the travel, but also for your life itself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Wonderful. And where can everybody find you, Kelly?
Yes. So I'm on Instagram a lot, way more than I should be. So you can find my personal, it's at kelly.tolliday. And then my business is, I have 2 different businesses, but at Transform with Travel is for the podcast and the travel advising. And then at Rising Nature Retreats is where you can find everything for our retreats and group tours. You can find, if you just Google any of those, you'll see our website on there as well. And shoot me a DM. I'm like super open. Again, I'm on all the time. So I'll probably respond back very quickly. That's one of my intentions, is to like stop being so on all the time on social media. But I just love it. I have friends from all over the world. At any given time of the day, I can talk to somebody. So, so it's really
Lean
fun.
into it then, like just it
Yeah.
is what it is.
Yep.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Oh, this was
No, thank you.
wonderful. Thank you.